In this video, I want to talk about the relationship between pain and biomechanics, or pain and quality of movement. And on the screen, I'm using this Toomey clean video from the 2019 CrossFit Games to talk about that example. And this video has been used as an example to show that pain and movement faults are not related, because as she is going through this phase of the movement here, you see that she goes into valgus as she presses up into the movement. And then one would say, well, since she valguses and she is not having pain, valgus and pain are not connected. And I would like to kind of talk about some of the issues with those statements and conclusions that are made. One, when we're talking movement, the context and in the environment is everything. And that's the same as true for pain when we talk about how to treat pain. So that's important. And also, if we're going to take these isolated snapshots in time of movement, we need to view it as the whole picture and the scenario that surrounds this. So yes, she can do this movement, has some valgus, and there's no pain. But then the next question I would ask is this the technique that she always uses? Because here is a 1 repetition max lift where she's either gonna, one, fail the lift by not completing it, or two, use whatever strategy her body can utilize to complete the movement. And then that becomes a different conversation, because there's a lot on the line and I need to complete this movement. So I'm going to use whatever I can. So as we're going to break down this video, and we're going to talk about all the positive things that she does and why the valgus is okay here, and why valgus, if you do it all the time, might be a weaker strategy for the body. Because the things that you should think about is that valgus is okay, and it's a posture that the body can do, but valgus should not be the only posture. There's weak postures and there's strong postures for the body. The weak ones can still be tolerated without pain, but if that's what your go-to all the time strategy is, that's going to burn a hell of a lot of energy for your body. It's not going to be very efficient, and it's going to have this sort of wear and tear impact that will most likely lead to things down the line that could be associated with pain, such as muscle tightness, such as increased soreness, such as stress fractures, and all those things sort of fill into the bucket of probable pain as you load those mechanoreceptors and you overload the sensory system, because the quality of that input is going to determine sort of the quality of the output. Your ability to buffer and give a proper response is dictated by the quality of input just as much. And that's that sensory input afferent feedback to the output of the brain's aspect of how it deals with pain. So let's go over this movement and see what she does, where she executes it well, maybe why she valguses at this phase and the range of the motion. So as she prepares the lift, she loads really well throughout the entire thing. As she drops down, you see that her hips stay wide, her knees are open. She's maintaining good form to drop down and load that weight. Because on that movement, when you drop into this position, being able to have your hips stay open is going to allow then for your sacrum to drop down between your ilia and create this wedge-shaped structure that, one, distributes force, and two, allows you to then use your glutes to power you up. So she loads into the movement really well. And then you'll see she does a slight bounce here, and that small bounce gives her momentum. It gives her leverage. It gives her sort of a kinetic energy to load into that movement. I bet she doesn't do that same strategy when she has only 135 pounds on the bar, but at the max RM, she buffers her joints a little bit. She uses some of that spring loading potential that we should use and that we do have, and that saves the tissues as long as you know how to use it. So then as she pushes up in this phase of the range, we see that knee valgusing. Now, why does it happen here? Because if we go a little bit further, she gets the knees back out. So she presses those knees back out, utilizes the outer hips, the outer glutes, the glute max, the hip rotators, everything that can generate torque from the subtalar joint up through the knees, up to the hips to complete the movement. But the reason that she valguses in the mid-range is because it's a max repetition lift. So it's at the extremes of her capacity. And the hips are going to be weakest in that range when you're down in the bottom of it. So she uses a little bit of momentum, locks the joints, because that's what valgus does. It creates this sort of bony joint lock to hold the position, as she then can leverage her body higher up in that movement. Now, at this point, we should have this conversation around, is valgus truly bad or is it not bad? Well, valgus that's not controlled by any sort of hip and ankle structure is going to have somewhat of a negative impact on the body. But at the same time, if you look at Olympic weightlifters, a lot of their movements have this valgus aspect to their movement. So is that a negative thing or is it not? And what I would say is, when you squat, there needs to be, I'm going to lower this down just slightly more. As you drop into that squat, too much out is going to put you into supination of the foot. Supination of the foot is thought to be connected with tibial external rotation. As you drop down into the deceleration phase of the squat, so the lowering of the squat, the knee, as the knee flexes, what happens? Tibial internal rotation. Internal rotation of the tibia is more associated with pronation, but that allows you to use your spring and arch of the foot. And so we need to have relative tibial internal rotation as the knee flexes. That tibial internal rotation, if you're not strong and connected to the hip, then becomes this uncontrolled valgus mechanism. So as my foot is here and I load into it, that and if you look at any Olympic lifters, they'll have that same strategy of it'll almost look like they drop in a bit. It's not uncontrolled or they're weak here, but the goal is to drive out as long as you have the balance at the knee joint to maintain that. So when you fly, or when you go into a squat and the knee flexes, there's this reciprocal tibial internal rotation. Think of the screw home mechanism. As you extend your leg out, there's tibial external rotation. As you bend your knee back down, it tibially internally rotates, which is associated with pronation at the foot. So that stuff needs to happen. And too much one way or the other is going to cause issues because you're not leveraging the arch mechanics of the foot. You're taking your foot out of subtalar neutral, which distributes the load differently up through the pelvic girdle. All those things are important. So as we get back into that video, we see in this one phase of it here that she drops into valgus, which is the weakest or hardest part of the phase for her, and then she corrects that movement. So we know that the knee valgus by itself is not a problem. People can do that and they don't have pain, but you need to ask yourself, why are they doing it? Is that their only strategy? What sort of injuries or what sort of individual biomechanics is that person working with that are all going to contribute or potentially lead into issues with the repetition of what this is required? And what I would say is, this is not her all the time strategy. This is her one repetition max strategy. And since she's a high-end athlete, she knows the importance of getting drive through the hips, and that drive through the hips cannot happen if she's in too much valgus, because it takes away the capability of the glutes to do the work and drive the movement up. Think about it as too much valgus, which is going to be this combination of hip internal rotation, is going to close off the hip joint and essentially create like a hip impingement. And if you are putting yourself in that hip impinged position, the glutes have no mechanical advantage to work from. And that's where it's a strategy for this movement because it locks through a certain range. And then she gets out of that position to use the muscular tension of the body, which is a much stronger approach. And it's an approach that's going to serve her kind of like throughout the longevity of her career. So I hope this sheds some insight into the relationship of pain and biomechanics. These are okay as strategies to utilize, but if that's the only strategy, then that becomes a much more significant problem. So I hope the Tia Toomey video helped break down some of the thoughts on pain versus biomechanics or pain versus movement quality.